So moving on in Unit 3, we're going to go on to the Korean War. This lesson is called The Forgotten War. So take a second, prepare a new quad chart. Our essential question is how and why did the Korean War begin? And then what was our role as U.S. forces in the initial stages of the Korean War? So Korea, initially at the end of World War II, had been under Japanese control, like much of China and Manchuria. At the conclusion of World War II, if you recall, the Soviets broke their non-aggression pact with the Japanese, and they continued pushing down along the border, extending the borders of the eastern realm of the Soviet Union. And the United States played a small part in liberating the Korean peninsula in the south side. And we agreed at that point in time to divide the peninsula into a Soviet North Korea and an American supported South Korea. Same with the North. The Soviet supported. It wasn't going to be part of the Soviet Union. And then the South elects Syngman Rhee as the first president. This is completely rejected by the communists in the North, and they appoint Kim Il-sung as the first great leader in North Korea. And we see, if you look at this picture and you think of the ways that the communist leaders have dressed, it's almost uniform throughout the communist country. Stalin dressed with these high-collared jackets. The same in China, same in other regions in that area of communist leadership. There's some North Korean propaganda. Obviously, they want to project that they are, unified and happy in their selection of their leader, and it remains separated. So North and South Korea eventually become recognized as independent nations. It was never the objective. The goal was for them to be unified. And there was really no effort on either side of the supporters, the Soviets or the Americans, to do this. Kim Il-sung wants to unify the peninsula. Stalin says, sure, but I'm not going to commit any forces to doing this, and you should go ask China to help you. I realize that Stalin has just come out of a really bloodbath in World War II. He lost 25 million men in that war. He's got other things that he's focusing on out towards his western borders in Europe. So really, what's going on in Korea is on the back table for him. At that point, both Soviet and American forces kind of withdraw, and the South is completely incapable of protecting itself, which sets the stage for the invasion of forces from the North. Early in the morning on June 25th, they invade to the south, and they're gonna get down there pretty rapidly. Here's some of the main implications of that. The Soviets, Stalin was putting pressure on the North to kind of do this, although he wouldn't give them any support. The Soviets and China really desire to get rid of that capitalist country at the southern tip of the perimeter and give them an entire unified Soviet bloc, almost as if Stalin has adopted some of Truman's domino theory, thinking that that one country that's operating independently with freedom would impact the North and have some type of effect overall. Another thing, Stalin says the USSR will not intervene. He still doesn't have really the troop strength to do that. He's starting to look at developing nuclear weapons, but they don't have the ability to conduct ground operations, particularly that far away from where they can support them in all the way in Western Russia. And Kim Il-sung declares this war is going to be won in 3 days. And it looks like it's going to happen just that fast at the beginning. Initially, you look at the outnumbering of the troops. They've got 90,000 troops, tanks, and aircraft that are going to invade from the north. The South Korean army has only 38,000 troops, and only a third of those are on duty at one time. So if you could imagine, South Korea is small enough to fit all of it inside of about half of Colorado. If you were in the army in South Korea, you could have been from any corner, anywhere, any village in South Korea. So if you were not on duty at that time, it would make sense that you would go home. So there was only a third, about 12,000 troops on duty at the time that almost 100,000 North Koreans attacked. Outnumbered 5-1, not very well trained. They don't have very much communication or technical communication, very little leadership, and unable to coordinate any type of defense. And the North has claimed that the South attacked them, so they're only doing this, in retaliation to try to defend themselves. And of course, that was completely false. But the end result is that the North can't be stopped. The South can't protect itself. And although the war is not over, as Kim Il-sung pronounced, he did take Seoul inside of only 3 days. President Truman's response in the United States is we need to respond, but we have to avoid conflict and drawing the Soviets or drawing China into the war. So he starts this strategy, if you can call it that, of limited warfare. Up until this point in time, anytime the U.S. has committed troops, it's been total war. War in which the Union is at stake. War in which our nation is at stake. Something that potentially could impact our way of life. Korea wasn't that. It was all the way around the world. Truman wanted to help the Koreans, but he didn't want to get drawn into yet another long war, potentially with communist bloc Russia and China. So, the way I interpreted limited wars, not doing what it takes to win out of fear from inciting Russia. So that's our objective as we go in. It's counterproductive to any commander's really preconceived training or concept of warfare. MacArthur certainly doesn't understand how to execute a limited war, achieve an objective without completely, resorting to all of his assets. So all we're really doing is trying to preserve democracy, and it allows for the landing of U.S. forces to set the stage for a massive assault that's going to take place, pushing the North Koreans further south. This is called the Great Naktong Offensive, and they take and push everything all the way back to the Pusan perimeter. So this is the city of Pusan. The United States 8th Army are the UN forces that have come in here and occupied, and they put a border all around Pusan to try to preserve that main port city in the south. And the North Koreans really attempt to collapse that line and push them all the way back out. And we see some fierce fighting at this point in South Korea. And the North is a fairly formidable opponent at this point in time, and we were not really prepared at all. But this defense must stand, and MacArthur does a very good job of maintaining his defenses. If we look at this map, the defense of Naktong, you see everything down here around Pusan in blue. All of the red arrows outside of the blue line of UN forces are North Korean forces, and they're being repelled against some pretty fierce firefights and loss of life on the U.S. side and on the North Korean side during these battles. But ultimately, the 8th Army is able to hold off the Pusan perimeter in an attempt to really just delay so that MacArthur could launch a massive landing further up the peninsula of Korea and cut off those attacking forces. It's exactly what MacArthur tries to do with the invasion of Incheon. Incheon is further north and very close to Seoul, so he thinks that he can get a great number of troops ashore near Seoul and then push the North Koreans out of there and retake the city. So here again, we see in this map, this is the Pusan perimeter down here where 8th Army is. General MacArthur floats all the way around quite a bit up to the north. Here's the 38th parallel, which typically is referred to as what separates North and South Korea. He lands at Incheon and moves forces into Seoul. Now, he was told this couldn't be done. The people in Washington, D.C. said that Incheon didn't have beaches that would support a massive beach landing or an amphibious assault. It had rather high tides and seawalls that weren't conducive to an amphibious assault and beach landing. But MacArthur, who's been in the Pacific for 12 years and knows the region better than anybody in Washington, D.C. or in the Pentagon of the military leaders, decides I'm going to go ahead with it anyway. And really a maverick type of decision and assault. And ultimately, he's successful. He does this by overwhelming the enemy with a great deal more troops than what the Democratic People's Republic of Korea can amass at that time. And they take their beaches relatively easy, and they prepare that objective with massive shelling before they decide to attack. Here's why you can see that these weren't suitable beaches traditionally for an amphibious assault. They're very, very narrow. Once they get troops on there, they've got a very shallow approach to where they could get in. Had the North Korean forces massed there to prepare for that, this would have been a very different situation for MacArthur. But ultimately, he's able to get in, move quickly in toward Seoul, and move lots of supplies in to move toward the liberation of Seoul. And that's where we'll pick up on the next lesson after the landings at Incheon, when General MacArthur pushes his forces in to liberate Seoul.